Welcome. In this lesson, we're going to learn about a concept called loops. Now, to demonstrate that concept, I'm going to have a quick look at this set of instructions I have here. It says print student 1, print student 2, print student 3. And the idea being I want to print out a whole list of students, but with their student number 1, 2, 3 in front of it. Now, imagine I'm in a situation where I want to print out another 10. Now, obviously, what I could do is I could copy and paste this. I could paste it again. I could update these to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, I want you to appreciate that that is kind of a laborious, long-winded process. What happens if I wanted to print 1 million student names? Imagine how long I'd be here. And so we're going to use this concept of loops to get around this. So essentially what we need to do is look for the pattern. What is the pattern that repeats? The pattern that repeats is that we have a student, yes, printed out every single time, but we have a number that increases by 1 every single time. Now, when we talk about loops, there's really just two types of loops. There's loops where we know exactly how many times it's going to go around. So maybe I know it's going to repeat 10 times. And that is called either count controlled or definite iteration, because you know definitely how many times it's going to go around. The alternative to that is indefinite iteration, where by definition it could run maybe 5 times, maybe 100 times. You just don't know. Now, in this case, I'm assuming I do know how many students I want to put out here. So I'm going to say it's 10 students, and I'm looking at the bit that repeats. And the bit that repeats is just this bit here when it outputs student and the name and the number of the student. So I'm going to chop this bit here, and I'm just going to keep this bit here. Now, to do a definite or count-controlled loop, the effective syntax is to use what's called a for loop. And so a for loop says for, and then you need a variable to count. So I could say count, and in range, and I need to say how many times I want it to go around. Now I said 10 times, so I can go for count it in range 10. And remember, it's a colon at the end. I need to indent this bit, so either tab or space, but up to you. And I'll hit enter. Now, this will run, and let me explain what it will do. It's going to print this, it's going to repeat this loop 10 times. So it's going to reprint this out 10 times. So if I run it, you're going to see student 1 10 times. Ooh, you can't quite see that. So you have to just take my word. There we go. So you can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, if you remember, that wasn't our intention. What we wanted is for it to come with a new name, a new number rather, every single time. So let's think about how we might do that. Now, I said that this is a variable called count, and count is the one that's changing as we go along. So instead of saying student, we could say, student 1, we could say plus count, because count is the one that's going to be counting up as we go along. And if we run that, it's not going to be happy with us. And I'll tell you why, because the data type of count is an int. And we've learned about this a few times. So what we'll have to do is go, do you remember we have to cast it as a different data type? So we have to turn it from an int into a string. So we go str, put some brackets around it, and hopefully this time when we run it, it's going to run successfully. Oops. Now, it has done it 10 times, but do you see what it's not? It's done something we didn't quite want, because actually in a for loop, it starts counting from 0. So it's done 10, but it's gone 0 to 9. There's actually a quite straightforward way of fixing that. If we just go +1, then that would allow us to fix it. And now counts from 1 to 10. And do you remember I said to you earlier, ultimately you could just copy and paste and change it. If I want to just print out 100 students, I can literally go from count in range 100. So count will be 0 the first time, and then it'll be 1 and 2 and 3. And as you can see, when I run it, it eventually will end up with this. It goes all the way from 1 to 100. That's with something quite straightforward here, but you can imagine the power of loops here. you could have a quite complicated little bit of algorithm. And if you can spot that pattern, instead of having to rewrite it every time, you just take that piece of pattern and you tell it to loop. And really, that is one of the most powerful elements of computer science. Okay, let's see if you've actually got that. Below here, you can see the new challenge. And the challenge is ask the end user to input a message. Then ask them how many times they want to repeat that. Now remember, if you ask them to input it, the data type will be string. And if you want to talk about how many times it needs to repeat, you're going to have to make sure that that's actually an int. And then output that message 6 times. So for instance, you could say the person says, message is, hey there. And you could repeat it 6 times. And then it will repeat, hey there, 6 times. The cheat sheets for the last 2 topics and this one will come up. Give it your best shot. Pause now. Okay, how'd you get on? Hopefully you had a pretty good go at it. I'm going to solve the problem now. So first of all, I'm going to take in the message. So input message, what message would you like to send, or like to say? It's fine for this to be a string. The next one is the number of times it repeats. So I'm going to use repeats as a variable name. Now remember, I said that you're going to need to store this as an int. So I'm going to cast it as an int input. And then the question will be, how many times would you like to repeat? Now we've got the 2 bits of data we need. We know how many times it's going to go around, so it's definitely a definite iteration or count controlled loop. In that case, we use the for, which is the only one we know about so far. So for count in range, and the range will be determined by repeats, because we've said they've said 6, 7, 8, whatever it's going to be. Colon, and then we can say print, and then message. And so we can test that out. So I'll run it. And yeah, I'll do the hey there. And we'll say, I don't know, 4 times. Success. Okay, this challenge, I would say, is a little bit trickier than the last one. I'm going to read it through, and we'll pause and you'll have the cheat sheets to try and solve it. But I think even when I try and solve it, it'd be worthwhile you pausing me as I go along, because it might be kind of unlock about your thinking. Anyway, it's another extension of one of these algorithms that's about an end user inputting their grades. And in this case, the end user inputs how many tests they've taken, whether that's 3 tests or 5 tests. Remember, if you're inputting that and you're using it as a number, you're going to want to convert that to a int, or cast it as an int, I should say. And then you need to output a message to the end user to input their score. So input their scores for each of their tests individually. And then you need to output the average score. Think about how you might want to do that. And then you're going to figure out what the high score is. Like I said, this is going to be tricky. Don't rush into it. Take your time, break the problem down, decompose it into sections. Pause me now. Okay, how'd you get on? Hopefully you made a reasonable start at this, but let's have a look how I might want to solve it. So the first thing I want to look at is to ask the end user how many tests they're taking. So let's say tests as a little variable. Remember, if I want to store how many as a number, I want to store that as an int and not as a string. So I want to cast it as an int, and then input. What's the question? Well, I mean, how many tests maybe would work well. How many tests have you taken? Okay, what are we doing with this? Well, we want to now use a loop because we want to repeatedly ask them now how many they've taken. So for, we need a variable to count with, so we can use count. So for count in range tests, because that will say, if you said 6, it'll repeat 6 times. And so what do we want to do? We want to use the input, please enter test score, or input test, make it easier myself. And wouldn't it be nice if we said, say, test 1, test 2, test 3? To do that, we can use this count here to allow us to do it. So I can say plus count. Now, if you remember, there is a slight issue with just using count because it's actually an int. So I have to cast it as a string. Also, if we run it this way, the first time the for loop will run, it will actually be 0, and then 1, and then 2. So it'd say, please enter test 0, please enter test 1. And although computers start count from 0, we don't count from 0. So if you go +1, that will fix that for you. So we're inputting this data, but we need to store it somewhere. So, I'm going to put in here what a variable to store it. So I'll call it score. And remember, as it's written right now, the score is going to be taken in as a string. We do not want that. Either a float or an int, but I'm going to say it's to a whole number. So I'm going to cast it as an int. So that's going to store the score here. The next thing I want to think about is I want to get an average score. To get an average score, what I need to do is add every single one of these scores together. And the easiest way to do that would be just to add each score to a total every time that the loop goes around. So I need to initialize a new variable, and I'll call it total, and initialize it at the value 0. Down here, underneath this line then, once I've imported the score, I'll get total is equal to total plus score, meaning that every time it goes around, a score will be added to it. I think that's all I need right now just to test this section. So I can test this out. I'll say that there's, 3 tests. Let's say they've got 5, 10, and 15, which should give me an average of 10. I don't like this bit here, so we might fix that in a second. Oh, of course it's not telling us. We've not outputted the value, so that's my bad. So here maybe we're going to put in maybe a colon, a space, and then speech marks, and that would just put a colon at the end when they're asking you the question. And we're going to say print the average score is. How are you going to do that? Yep, that's right. You're going to get the total score and divided it by tests. It's not going to be happy with us doing that because, of course, in here we've got an int divided by another int. So let's cast that as a string. There we go. And let's run that. And now hopefully, I'll get a little bit better syntax. Oops. Oh, it's not happy with me somewhere. What have I done here? So I've got 1, 2, 3. I'm really glad this has happened. It gives me a great opportunity. So I've opened one bracket here, second one there, third one here. So I'll need to close all 3. And do you see I've closed that one? You see it matches up. That one matches up. But that one at the beginning, I haven't. So I need to do another one. Yeah, it's very particular about things like that. So I'll say, again here, I'll say 3 tests and 5, 10, and 15. Yeah, your average test score is 10 as a float. Okay. The other 2 things to solve was the highest score and the lowest score. Okay, well, if you think about it, for highest, what we're going to need to do is every time this turns around, we're going to need to search for if the new score you've put in was higher than any other score you've had before. And actually, because every time it loops, you can keep checking, is this the new highest? Is this the new highest? Is this the new highest? So to do that, I'm going to have a variable called highest, and I'll set it to 0. Now, why am I setting it to 0? Well, because I'm going to test if anything you input is higher than that. And in theory, everything will be, right? Because, unless you actually scored 0, you're going to probably put in a 1 or something. So I can say if score is greater than highest. So if the new one is higher than the highest one you've had before, right? So if you've scored 10 for the first one, then if the score of 10 is going to be higher than highest, which is 0. So that should become the new highest. So highest should become, so I assign the value of score. And then as it goes along, Maybe next time the score is 5 you've inputted. Is 5 greater than 10? Nope, so nothing happens. So I don't really need to do an else either, because I only really care about if it's higher. If I then say for the next score 15, is 15 greater than 10? Yes. So the highest is assigned that value, so the highest becomes 15. I don't really need to worry about anything else for the moment. And I can say in here, print the high score is... what's the variable? Highest. Again, it won't be happy if I just type it out like that, because highest will be an int. I want to cast it as a string. And always remember, like I made that boo-boo before, I need to remember that I've got this bracket and this bracket. This bracket here needs to match with this bracket here, otherwise it will not work. So let's try that out. So let's say 3 again. Let's do 5, 10, and 15. So we're thinking the average will be 10. But if I said 15, we're hoping that it will say the high score is 15, which it has. Fantastic. Do you know what? There's the lowest score as well. I'd love it if you actually gave that a try yourself. So I'm not going to solve it. I think you've got enough going on here for you to be able to solve it yourself. So I want you to give that a try. Just remember that if you're comparing things, you probably don't want the lowest to be 0, because everything will be lower than that. But it'd be very similar in syntax with that. So give that a try. Okay, let's delve a little bit deeper into the for loop. This is the original for loop we learned about, where we had a loop that used a variable called count. It started at 0, went up to the range of 10, which actually means it stops at 9, because there's 10 different values, 0 to 9. So it would output the student, and because count started at 0, it will be student 0, student 1, every time it loops until it gets to student 9. Now, actually, there are ways we can tweak a for loop, and you'll see that hopefully below. There's a little sheet teaching about it. But what happens if I just want to actually have it so that I can start at a certain value? Well, that's something you can do now. You can say start value, you can say stop value, and you can say step. So let's talk about what we mean by this. Start, that literally means the number you want it to start at. So if I'm trying to do 1 to 10, I could say I could start at 1. Stop is a little bit more complicated. It's kind of where it's going to stop-ish, you'll see in a moment. And then step is by how much you're going to go up by. So if I say step 1, it's increasing by 1 every time. If I say 3, it'll increase by 3 every time, etc. So for this, let's say we're going to replicate what we did before. So start at 1, end by stopping at 10, and increasing by 1 every time. So at the beginning, count will be 1. It goes around in a loop. Count will become 2. Count will become 3 and 4, because it's stepping up by 1 every time. Let's run that, and let's see what that looks like. So if I run it, you can see here that it's kind of done what we wanted. It's gotten from 1, but it didn't go up to 10. In fact, actually, the test is count less than this value, this 10 value? And of course, when we get to count being 10, is 10 less than 10? No, it isn't, so it stops. So what we'd have to do to fix it is change that to actually 11 in this case. And now if we run it, it's going to go all the way up to 10. Okay, let's look at some of the other things we might be able to do with it. So let's say with this same group of students, now we want to do the numbers going from 10, and we want to go up to 20. Now if we run it like this, what do you suppose is going to be, like bearing in mind what just happened, what do you think the downside's going to be? Yes, like last time, it's going to go 10 to 19, because count is less than 20, but 20 won't be less than 20 when it gets there. So we need to change that to 21. But now we can do a count of students starting at a different value. Okay, well, how about this? How about if I have 20 students, but what I want to do with these 20 students is I want to have one list of students who are going to be the even numbers, and one is going to be the odd numbers. So I can say starting from 1, so I guess this will be the odd numbers. But now instead of increasing by 1 every time, I'll increase by 2 every time. Should we see what happens? So if I run it, it's going to go 1, 3, 5, all the way up to 19. When it got to 21, you'd say, is 21 less than 21? No, so it would cancel. And if I wanted to do the evens, I could do another one underneath. Well, I mean, obviously what I could do is just do another print here and say count plus 1. Maybe I'll show that super quick, just so for the benefit of what we're demonstrating. Because if I said count plus 1, that would be 1, that would be 2. So if I run it, it's actually going to look like I'm just counting all the way up. What I'm saying is I want two separate lists. So let's get rid of that bit there. In fact, let me just steal this piece here. And now I want to do the same thing, but for the even numbers. In this bit here, you can see which bit I'm going to change. Right. I want to start at 2. Do I still want to go up to just numbers less than 21? Yes, I do. Do I still want to increase by 2 every time? Yes, I do. So now when we run it, I'm going to see it's all the odds from 1 to 19, and then all the evens from 2 to 20. Okay, so this activity should be fairly straightforward. I'm just asking you to extend what we learned from before. If you read below, instead of just having it being odd and even, this time what it's asking you to do is it's asking you to say, can you do 3 different groups? So it would be like, I don't know, like in PE or whatever, when you're picked into teams, you'd be like, you're 1, 4, 7, 10, etc. And then the group would be 2, 5, 8, 11, then 3, 6, 9, 12. And so let's say there's 20 students. Can you pick those 3 different groups using this new 4 count, extending this? Okay, pause now. Okay, how'd you get on? Hopefully it wasn't too tricky. It's actually quite straightforward, this one. Obviously, we're going to need to have a third count, so it's going to go in here. And in here, we can say that we've got a new 4 one. Ooh, I wouldn't indent it, though, like that, because it's a separate 4 count. This time, we're starting from 3. Now, if we run this, it's not going to do what we want it to do, because we don't want it to go up in 2s. We want it to go up in 3s. So that's going to go up in 3s. That one's going to go up in 3s. And that one's going to go up in 3s. The difference being is it starts from 1s, from 2s, and from 3s. Should we see what it looks like? So let's run it. And we can see here that we've got the 1, 4, 7, 10, 13, 16, 19, 2, 5, 8, etc., etc., etc. Okay, we're now on to the you section. This is where it's over to you to try and solve the problem. You have been taught the skills over this lesson to be able to do this. Just take the time to really process it, think it through, and you'll be able to actually answer this question. Let's look through it together, and then you can give it a try. So first of all, you have to ask the user how many items they've purchased. The idea is they've gone to a shop or something and they've bought some stuff. You're asking them, first of all, how many have they bought? Now consider what data type do you need for that. Is that going to be a string? Is that going to be an int? Is that going to be a float? What are you going to use for it? Then enter the price for each item. Now, if you remember, let me help you out here. If you're using a string, you can't add together. When you add together, it just sticks things together. Now, your 2 choices then are either integer, int, or float. Now, think about it. An integer is a whole number. And when you give the price, you might say 1.83. Now, 1.83 is not a whole number. So my direct tip for you right now is for price, use a float. Then output the total price needed to pay. So in this loop that presumably you're going to be making, you're going to have to just take the items in turn as they input it and then tell them how many they've actually purchased. Now, the last bit, this is the extension, is for each item they've bought, you can also ask them a second question, is how many of these items has been bought, and use that to update the question or update the total. Okay, you can do this. Confidence, best of luck, pause now. Okay, how did you do? Hopefully it wasn't too terrible. Remember that if you really get stuck, you can also return to the previous Wii activities, and there's actually planted in there are all the tips you need to successfully do this. If it went well, that's awesome. Let me see it, and I'll see you in the next one.